So what do you do if somebody wants you to write in a modernist style? So the first thing you're going to think about is form. So modernists tend to use first-person language with a dry, witty voice. So it's got to be first person because there is no objective truth, remember, so you can only tell your own version of the story. The sentences may be truncated or shortened to create suspense, and they usually lack ornate figurative language or adverbs. So by adverbs we mean things like happily, angrily, that sort of thing. And they focus on objects and actions in concrete visual detail. So one way of thinking about modernist writing is that it seems to emulate the screenplay of a film. It's mostly focused on scenes and visuals, and it leads you from one scene to the other, so often quite straightforward and chronological. In terms of content, appropriate topics are obviously going to be subjective personal observations because there aren't any other kind. So you'll be thinking about culture, maybe the depressing cheapness of life, or bourgeois shallowness, so the kind of emptiness of middle-class life. Social issues such as women's rights or the working class lives of cotton mill workers might be sort of important topics that are very typical of the modernist era. And then you have to think about setting. So there are lots of really iconic places you can choose. So sawdust-floored pubs, they put sawdust on the floor so that they can absorb alcohol and even puke, which is kind of charming. Cheap hotels, upper-class parties that involve lavish food and drink, factories, and even ocean liners like the Titanic that travel across the Atlantic. These are all going to make iconic locations for the modernist era. So, what should you read from the modernist era? The good thing about modernism is that most of it is really short because it's a time where nobody has enough free time. Aside from Tolstoy, everybody else tends to write novellas. So they're short, they're often very visual and very easy to read. So one of the easier poems of T.S.Eliot to have a look at is Preludes, so that's a good place to start. Lovesong and J. Alfred Prufrock's a little bit harder, but once you've read Preludes, you might be able to get into it. So they're both worthwhile poems and also good additional material. You could look at Orlando, A Room of One's Own, or Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and again, Virginia Woolf makes great additional material. You could look at Brave New World and 1984. In fact, some people would say that if you're only going to read 2 books in your life, it should be Brave New World and 1984. You could also have a look at some of George Orwell's essays. They're usually very funny and easy to read. And one of the very funny ones is him trying to convince the people he works with that it's better to buy books than cigarettes. And of course, you can't leave the Americans out. It's a good idea to have a look at The Great Gatsby.